Japan has a 4.5% obesity rate. The United States has over 40%. Japan is not a quiet island of monks. It is one of the most urbanized, overworked, densely populated nations on Earth. And the average Japanese person lives to 84 years, the longest average lifespan on the planet. Here's the part that should stop you completely. They eat rice at almost every meal. They count 0 calories. They do not follow elimination diets. Something specific is happening in their bodies that the mainstream conversation about weight and metabolism almost never addresses. And after 60, understanding what that is may be the most important thing you do for your health this year. I'm Dr. Chandler. I study age-related metabolic decline, specifically why weight gain, visceral fat accumulation, and metabolic dysfunction accelerate after 60, and what the clinical evidence says about reversing them. A large-scale comparative analysis published in the journal Nutrition Reviews, examining dietary patterns across multiple populations, confirmed that the traditional Japanese dietary pattern is associated with significantly lower visceral fat, lower systemic inflammation, and longer health span than any Western dietary model studied. By the end of this video, I will give you the complete daily protocol, the specific foods, the amounts, and the timing. But first, I need to show you the mechanism. Because without understanding why this works, most people implement it incorrectly and see nothing. Here is what concerns me most about metabolism after 60. Most people treat weight gain in their 60s as an inevitable consequence of aging, something to accept, to manage with medication, to dress around. What the research makes clear is that metabolic decline after 60 is not primarily driven by aging itself. It is driven by a specific set of changes in the gut, in fat tissue, and in inflammatory signaling that respond directly to what you eat. The longer those changes go unaddressed, the more they compound. Visceral fat, the fat wrapped around your internal organs, is not passive storage. It is an active hormone-producing tissue that drives insulin resistance, inflammation, and cardiovascular risk simultaneously. And after 60, it accumulates faster than at any earlier point in your life. The Japanese dietary pattern addresses the root cause, not the symptom. The reason most diets fail after 60 has nothing to do with willpower, and everything to do with a variable that calorie counting completely ignores: your gut microbiome. Trillions of bacteria living inside your intestines regulate your hunger hormones, control your body's inflammatory response, determine how quickly you burn or store fat, and send direct signals to your brain telling it to eat or to stop. When that microbial community is diverse and healthy, those signals work correctly. You feel satisfied at the right time. Fat burns efficiently. Inflammation stays low. When it is disrupted by years of processed food, refined sugar, low fiber intake, and repeated antibiotic use, the bacterial balance shifts. Studies consistently show that people with obesity carry a higher proportion of one bacterial family, called Firmicutes, and a lower proportion of another called Bacteroidetes. This is not a coincidence. This specific imbalance amplifies hunger signals, promotes fat storage, and drives chronic low-grade inflammation that accelerates every aspect of metabolic aging. After 60, this imbalance is more common, more entrenched, and more consequential than at any earlier age, because decades of dietary habits have shaped it. And it is directly addressable through food. Research published in the journal Cell in 2015 confirmed that gut microbiome composition is more predictive of post-meal blood sugar response than any standard dietary or genetic marker. Two people eating identical meals can have completely different metabolic outcomes based solely on their microbial profile. This week, one diagnostic question to ask yourself: do you eat any naturally fermented food daily? Not yogurt with added sugar, not vinegar-pickled vegetables, but genuinely fermented food with live cultures? If the answer is no, your microbiome is likely operating without one of its primary inputs. That is where the protocol begins. The most powerful fermented food for microbiome restructuring after 60 is one most Americans have never tried, and the clinical data behind it is more specific than almost anything in nutrition research. Natto is a Japanese breakfast food made from soybeans, fermented with a bacterium called Bacillus subtilis. Its appearance and smell are unfamiliar to most Western palates. That unfamiliarity has kept it out of American health conversations, despite the fact that it has more clinical data behind it than most supplements sold in pharmacies. Here is what happens in your gut when you eat natto regularly. Bacillus subtilis is acid-resistant. It survives the journey through your stomach and arrives in your intestine alive. Once there, it competes with and progressively displaces the Firmicutes' dominant bacterial profile associated with obesity, and replaces it with the Bacteroidetes dominant profile associated with leanness and metabolic health. Research published in the Journal of Molecular Nutrition and Food Research confirmed a dose-dependent effect. The more natto participants consumed, the greater the reduction in visceral fat. The mechanism. Natto suppresses fatty acid synthesis in the liver and simultaneously accelerates fat breakdown at the cellular level. A separate study found that obese subjects consuming natto for 8 weeks showed measurable reductions in body weight, liver weight, blood triglycerides, and total cholesterol, alongside confirmed microbiome restructuring. One critical detail, natto also contains nattokinase, an enzyme found nowhere else in the food supply that reduces blood viscosity and supports circulation. This is why Japanese tradition places natto at breakfast. In the morning hours, cardiovascular risk is highest. Nattokinase consumed at breakfast provides its peak circulatory benefit precisely during that window. That is not folk wisdom. That is biochemistry. 50 grams of natto daily, one standard package available at any Asian grocery store, or frozen natto, which restores full bacterial activity after thawing. Eat it at breakfast with a small amount of soy sauce and mustard, exactly as consumed in Japan. Never heat it. High temperature destroys the live cultures and the nattokinase enzyme simultaneously. Natto restructures the microbial environment, but there is a second mechanism that determines how much energy your body burns at rest, and after 60, this system has been quietly shutting down for years. Your body contains 2 types of fat tissue. White fat stores energy, brown fat burns it, generating heat through a process called thermogenesis. The more active your brown fat, the more calories your body burns at complete rest with no exercise required. Brown fat's ignition switch is a protein called UCP1. After 60, brown fat activity declines significantly, driven partly by falling estrogen in women and testosterone in men, and partly by reduced cold exposure and physical activity. The result is a resting metabolism that runs progressively slower year by year. Japanese matcha green tea contains a compound called EGCG, epigallocatechin galate, at concentrations 137 times higher than standard bagged green tea. The difference is structural. Matcha is made from the entire ground tea leaf, consumed whole, not steeped and discarded. A systematic review published in the journal Nutrients, covering 10 experimental studies, confirmed that EGCG increases UCP1 activity. It directly activates the brown fat ignition switch. Once activated, brown fat begins using white fat as its primary fuel source. Researchers at the University of Geneva demonstrated that a green tea extract containing 90 milligrams of EGCG combined with caffeine increased 24-hour energy expenditure by 4% and shifted the body's primary fuel source from carbohydrates to fat, confirmed by a measurable drop in the respiratory quotient. Critically, when the same dose of caffeine was given without EGCG, the effect was 0. The mechanism requires the synergy between the 2 compounds. This is why isolated caffeine supplements do not produce this outcome. And it is why matcha specifically, not green tea capsules, is the effective delivery vehicle. 1 to 2 teaspoons of ceremonial-grade matcha powder in water, heated to 79 degrees Celsius, not boiling, which destroys up to 60% of the EGCG before the drink reaches your mouth. Add a slice of lemon. Ascorbic acid increases EGCG absorption up to 6 times. No cow's milk. The protein casein binds to catechin molecules and reduces their bioavailability by 80%. Drink matcha 30 minutes before your largest meal, when brown fat activation is primed to intercept incoming calories. The microbiome is restructured, brown fat is activated, but there is a third mechanism. the one that creates sustainable appetite control without hunger, and it operates through a signaling pathway most people have never heard of. The traditional Japanese diet is built on a combination of seaweed, root vegetables, barley, fermented vegetables, tofu, and fish. Every one of these foods delivers significant dietary fiber, both soluble and insoluble, in a ratio the Western diet almost never achieves. When fiber reaches your gut bacteria, they ferment it and produce short-chain fatty acids. The most important of these is butyrate. Butyrate does two things that are directly relevant to metabolism after 60. First, it repairs and reinforces the intestinal lining. After 60, gut lining integrity declines, a condition that allows bacterial toxins to leak into the bloodstream, triggering chronic systemic inflammation that directly accelerates visceral fat accumulation. Butyrate closes that barrier. Second, butyrate sends a satiety signal through the gut-brain axis to your hypothalamus. You stop feeling hungry not because you are exercising willpower, but because your gut has sent the correct biochemical message. This is the difference between a restriction-based diet and a physiology-based way of eating. One requires daily self-combat. The other runs automatically. The Fukuoka Diabetes Registry, a study covering more than 4,300 Japanese patients, found that high dietary fiber intake was significantly associated with lower BMI, lower fasting glucose, lower triglycerides, and lower systemic inflammation, even after controlling for total caloric intake. Fiber works independently of how much you eat. It changes what happens to food once it is inside you. 3 specific additions. 1 bowl of unpasteurized miso soup daily, paste dissolved in warm but never boiling water, which kills all live cultures, with wakame seaweed and tofu. 5 to 10 grams of dried wakame or kombu 3 to 4 times per week. And replace a portion of white rice with a 70-30 blend of white rice and barley at least once daily. Barley contains beta-glucan, a soluble fiber with particularly strong butyrate-producing activity. Now I want to tell you about a patient whose case made all 3 of these mechanisms real for me in a way no study ever could. Hiroshi was 67 when he came to see me. He had immigrated to the United States at 38 and had fully adopted an American dietary pattern over the following 3 decades. By the time I met him, his visceral fat was measurably elevated on imaging. His fasting blood sugar was 6.8. His triglycerides were high. His energy was, in his words, non-existent by noon. He had been told by his previous physician to reduce calories and increase exercise. He had tried. Nothing moved. When I took his dietary history, the contrast with his youth in Japan was stark. He had grown up eating natto, miso soup, fish, seaweed, and barley rice daily. In America, he ate cereal for breakfast, sandwiches at lunch, and pasta or pizza at dinner. His gut microbiome had been shaped by 30 years of low fiber, low fermentation, high processed food eating. We did not put him on a diet. We put him back on the foods his gut had been built to process. Natto returned to his breakfast. Miso soup replaced his morning coffee. Fish replaced the sandwiches 3 times a week. Wakame appeared in soups and salads. The barley rice blend replaced plain white rice. At 6 weeks, he told me his afternoon energy had returned for the first time in years. At 12 weeks, his fasting blood sugar had dropped to 5.6. His triglycerides had normalized. His waist circumference had reduced by 4 centimeters. His gastroenterologist, reviewing his chart, asked what medication he had started. The answer was none. The answer was natto and miso soup at breakfast. And now the piece that ties all 3 mechanisms together, the structural eating framework that makes the individual foods work as a system. Japanese meals traditionally follow a structure called Ichiju Sansai, 1 soup, 1 protein, and 2 vegetable sides, served with rice. No calorie counting, no macro tracking. The structure of the plate itself regulates nutritional balance and portion size automatically. You are not making decisions under pressure, you are following a template. The second principle is Hara Hachi Bu, an Okinawan concept meaning eat to 80% full. Stop before you feel satiated. The physiological reason: the satiety signal travels from your gut to your brain in approximately 20 minutes. If you eat quickly, you overshoot the signal before your brain receives it. Stopping at 80% means that 20 minutes later you feel exactly right. Not hungry, not heavy. This single principle reduces daily caloric intake by 15 to 20% without hunger and without counting anything. The third element is the overnight eating window. Traditional Japanese households finish dinner by 7 or 8 in the evening and eat breakfast at 7 the next morning. That is 11 to 12 hours without food. Not a deliberate fasting protocol, simply a cultural rhythm. But during those hours, the body shifts into fat oxidation mode. Beneficial gut bacteria operate without competition from incoming food. The liver undergoes repair and detoxification. This window costs nothing. It requires no willpower. It simply requires finishing dinner before 8. Combined, the foods, the meal structure, the 80% principle, and the overnight window, this is not a diet. There is nothing to restrict, nothing to eliminate. You are adding specific foods to a structural framework that your body already knows how to respond to. The Japanese population has been running this protocol for centuries. The outcomes are not a mystery. They are documented in the largest longevity datasets in the world. I want to ask you something. Of everything we covered today, the microbiome, the brown fat activation, the butyrate satiety signal, the meal structure, which one surprised you most? And where are you starting? Drop it in the comments along with your age. After 60, the metabolic stakes are different than they are at 40. The comments on this video help me understand exactly who is watching and what to cover next. And if you have tried Japanese foods before, or if natto sounds like the last thing you would ever eat, I want to know that too. Now, if cardiovascular inflammation is part of your picture after 60, and you want to understand what is specifically happening inside your arteries that your standard cholesterol test is not fully capturing, that is exactly what I cover in this video right here. Watch it next.